Thank you so much. Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I feel like I'm amongst kindred spirits, and so that's a very welcoming sense, a place to be. I'd like to start by calling out to the old people of this country. Their names are the Jinnabar people, as you know, and I'm asking those old ones to give us their gracious blessings as we come together here on their country. It's my belief that when sincere communications are offered from our hearts, it's in a language that is always spoken and is always heard. And so with that, I'd like to ask their blessings and give thanks to those elders as they watch over us here today. And also, there's a lot going on, but nonetheless, these are special moments when we come together. And so with your permission, I'd like to ask you to join me in just a few moments of silence, just a few deep breaths. And first one, reaching outwards to embrace and comfort the pain and suffering of innocent people everywhere. And now maybe inwards, offering compassion for the conflicts and suffering in our own hearts. And finally, an offering of gratitude around this circle for the communal self that we're participating within here this afternoon. Now, as you can tell, I'm not a practiced public speaker. My passions do run close to the surface, and I know that you will hold me in kindness when I struggle a bit. So, first of all, the clicker. Now, I believe it's customary now to declare one's positionality right at the outset, and I'm decidedly pale, male, and stale. So, might as well say it right up front. And also, I'm not from Australia, but somehow I feel like I'm where I need to be. So, positionality. Well, I think positionality is a nice way of framing the premise of postmodernism, which is namely that all reality is subjective. And to some degree, it's a good point. It makes sense. Every one of us our worldviews are flavored and filtered through the unique experiences that make up our individual lives. You have 8.3 billion people. You've got 8.3 billion versions of the truth. I think that's a low estimate, actually, especially given the number of multiple selves I experience in my own life. And I don't think I'm alone. Yet from amongst all these individual truths, there's a challenge, which is how do we construct shared truths? Like the speaker in front of us spoke about the communal sense. How do we form community? What truths do we form that around? And essentially, what shall we use as foundations to anchor the intersubjective realities which are the necessary heart of any social project? And how does a we make decisions? I think the West has struggled with this question for some time now. After rejecting divine kings and then the divine itself, we haven't really settled on a worthy replacement. Science has had a go. The Enlightenment thinkers pointed us down that path, and scientific thinking still guides many people today. And science does have its utilities. If we all believe in a certain kind of objective reality, that should enable us to make good decisions together. But science actually makes a proper hash out of ethical questions. And, ever since getting spun by quantum mechanics, science is sort of like, it's both more sure of itself and less certain of itself at the same time. So, common sense was a reliable friend, but that's pretty much useless now in this post-truth era of social media, echo chambers, and weaponized AI. Judging by current affairs, it seems clear that we now rely on the physics of the economy. And the economy is, without a doubt, a staggeringly pervasive conceptual framework for group cooperation. So, how we make decisions has become a question that is, by default, placed on the altar of finance because that's apparently our sole remaining arbiter of social affairs. But perhaps you're like me and feel that it's time to upgrade our basis for cooperative behavior. Perhaps these unsettled times are calling us to reflect carefully on what our common positionality is. It's what, in effect, we allow ourselves to worship. And I'll come back to that troublesome word shortly. Tyson Yunkaporta shared a yarn in Sand Talk, urging people not to squabble over who has the one proper view of the truth. He said that it's like people on a beach arguing over which one of them sees the true path to the moon, each one claiming they can clearly see the moon's reflection reaching out across the water straight to them. So in this talk, I make no claim to seeing the one true path, but I do hope to share with you some ideas about a worthy path. Chloe Goodyear, one of the absolute legends that makes this event possible, contacted me because of an essay I wrote in response to the question, given climate change, how can Queensland's planning systems be rendered fit for purpose? Now this question presents a whole lot of positionality in just a few words, starting with the premise, given climate change. So let's begin there. To rephrase it slightly, the question is, does human activity have an impact on the atmosphere to the extent that it can significantly affect the climate of the planet? Now just look at the intent of the question. Essentially, is checking if we civilized people can carry on with business as usual. I mean, if we're not responsible for changing the climate, might as well party hardy, right? But of course there's a snag with this line of reasoning, and aside from it being ethically repugnant, we know that the climate is always changing. I mean, here's a graph of the planet's available oxygen, right? We kind of need that. Over the life of the planet to date, and all of this stuff up front, that's all nitrogen and CO2 and a whole lot of methane. We don't even get oxygen towards the end of it. Never mind worrying about a few temperature anomalies or some sea level rise. And then, even then, if you look at the Holocene, this is deceptive because it's a logarithmic graph, but the Holocene is this tiny little plateau down here at the very, very end, and everything in Western like what we like to call Western civilization, every bit of it fits in just that little plateau down there. I tried to make it in a log, this is, like I said, it's a log scale, but if you imagine that blue bar at the bottom as being the actual scale to graph, the Holocene is shown. It's just like a quarter of a pixel thick, so you can't possibly see it. Anyway, it's obvious, like this is a very special moment, right, and it's going to change. So the problem there is that cities, with their long, brittle supply lines that they depend on, the soft technical underbellies, critical infrastructure supported by a water supply, waste handling, transport, energy, all this depends on chips, electricity, wires, a bazillion other little bits and pieces of things that can all go wrong. And without those management systems, cities become unlivable, and they come unlivable fast. So I think we ought to be responsible to these vulnerabilities. Now, bogging down in a debate over climate change causality is a distraction from the very real predicaments that confront the concrete urban civilization we are so very dependent on. Whether any specific change is due to human activities or not is irrelevant to the larger question of being prepared for change. So isn't the proper question, how can humans best negotiate an ongoing flourishing within the complex adaptive systems here on Earth? But the planning system, which we again referred to earlier with our intentional communities, the planning system that has given us wall-to-wall suburban sprawl across the Gold Coast hinterlands is a faithful expression of an overly narrow economic prime directive that our culture has settled on as its central positionality. And there's little suggestion that that position is going to shift of its own accord anytime soon. So, in my view, it's inevitable that major cities in the minority world will collapse. Brisbin, New York, London, Tokyo, these places are all far too dependent on business as usual to survive even minor catastrophes. Maybe Lagos, Dar es Salaam, Mariba will continue to function as urban centers for the next 100 years, but the rest of us snowflakes are ill-suited, spectacularly ill-suited for turbulent times. So what's a better plan? Well, right now, I reckon we ought to be having a national conversation about that better plan. And I said so in the planning essay that Chloe read. I proposed the establishment of 1,000 horticultural villages with populations of about 1,200 people each. These villages would need to be material self-reliant. They'd be populated by people interested in subsistence lifestyles. And people in these villages would steadily replace external dependencies with local alternatives, food and water, of course, and shelter, all fairly straightforward. And then reducing the exotic materials and industrial processing we literally can't live without at the moment. And of course, self-governance, again referring to the session earlier. How will people in those villages make decisions, settle disputes, and agree to goals? Plenty of practical questions. Out of curiosity, I chased the question of provisioning for a little bit. And we know that all real wealth comes from country, certainly all material wealth. So in the literal sense, for these villages, how much land do people really need to fulfill their basic needs? And I did some really approximate calculations and came up with a figure of about 12 hectares of land to materially provision a family of 4. So each village then is going to need about 4,000 hectares of country to be. By the way, judging by this audience and the people in it, I would love to talk with you further about that provisioning scale. It's still a real point of curiosity for me. So if you got some insights, please come see me afterwards. So to accommodate 1,000 of these villages, these horticultural villages, that's about how much of Queensland would be needed. So that's 1.2 million people in an area that currently accommodates 1,100. It's a very, very different approach to town planning, but there's no technical reason we couldn't give it a go. Now, on the one hand, especially if you're a councillor out there, a local government representative, you would say that this is an absurd notion and utterly impossible. And at the current moment, that's a pretty fair assessment. But on the other hand, a sober view of the actual state of our civilizational infrastructure could lead a rational person to think this small village scenario has a higher than random likelihood of occurring one way or another. And maybe it would make sense to start experimenting and learning now while we still have a bit of discretionary resourcing left to invest in the project. Now, all of this is quite serious business, but it's also beyond any one of us to imagine at scale. And in the face of such overwhelming complexity, most of us turn inwards and look for matters that are more within reasonable scope for change. Inward and outward, of course, are fractal reflections of each other across scales. The great Sri Nisargadatta summed it up along these lines. So, when I realize I am nothing, that is wisdom. And when I realize I'm everything, that is love. And he says, my life is a movement between these two truths. That's quite beautiful. So now, can I ask you to take a little bit of a breath here at this point and permit some spiritual content? Some folks can feel pretty cringe about this, and I totally get it. My folks were dedicated Christians as part of my deep background, but I rejected religion early on. At uni, I was educated as an engineer, and I enjoyed it. And frankly, I didn't see a lot of connection between the light of God's salvation and the quadratic equations that keep the lights on. It wasn't till much life scars later, much later, that I started to appreciate the relevance of spiritual teachings. I began to see actually how moral values are central to an individual's experience of life, and that ethical frameworks actually hold our families, villages, and cultures together. So once I understood these matters as a sort of social technology, I went looking for tools and materials. That's just what engineers do. And that's how I met Mother India. Now, I want to zero right in on a book of verse called the Bhagavad Gita. Most of you have at least heard of the Gita. Some of you may be very familiar with it. It's one of the world's most widely read holy texts. I only made contact with the Gita in the last few years, and I'm wholeheartedly recommending it to you. It's only 18 chapters, 700 verses. You can easily listen to it in a few hours, along with a brilliant interpretation by Eknath Eswaran. That's the one that was shared with me, and I appreciate it deeply. The Gita was held in oral tradition until it was compiled into the epic Mahabharata. That's the Maha, the big one. That was sometime around 300 BCE. And that's towards the end of what scholars refer to as the Axial Age. The Axial Age was a rather remarkable stretch of about 500 years when the who's who of foundational philosophers popped up right across the ancient world. We're talking about everybody from Buddha to Heraclitus, from Zarathustra and Archimedes to Plato, Confucius, and Lao Tzu. Now, these guys, building on the songs and stories from prehistory and their observations of modernity in their own times, these philosophers peered deeply into the human condition. They observed the world keenly, and they used the technology of writing to set their thoughts out as intellectual structures that endure and shape our own thinking right into this moment. And somehow they did that all before Claude or Facebook. The Gita itself is framed as a conversation between the mighty warrior Arjuna and his charioteer Krishna. It covers just about every conceivable aspect of how to live a full and proper life. The Gita doesn't shy away from hard problems. It is there. The battle it describes can easily be seen as an actual battle, or what to do when an individual is confronted with the worst possible decisions. You name it, the Gita has been there. Yet the Gita is not a scold, it's not a guilt trip or a set of commandments. Instead, it's a kind of map. At least that's how I see it. It's a kind of map. The Gita charts a path of reconciliation between the warring states within our own minds and calmly offers guidance on how to walk a path filled with service, joy, and wisdom. It sets out this proposition and then leaves each of us to make our own decisions. As Warren says, the Gita places human destiny entirely in human hands. It's not deterministic, but neither is it an expression of blind chance. We shape ourselves and our world by what we believe and think and act on, whether for good or ill. So, I want to be able to act in this world in service to something bigger than myself, free of ego attachment to the outcomes for good or ill. I also need a way to understand God, or the Brahma, in the middle of the Gita as an idea that is relevant to my life. And bearded patriarchs in the sky really aren't doing it for me. But having said that, having acknowledged that, I still believe we've become too distanced from the notion of worship. Worship and faith. Even saying these words out loud is challenging. Even at an event as inviting of good spirits as this one. But here's the thing. I reckon that for a social species like ours, worship and faith are actually unavoidable. We can think of them maybe differently. We can think of worship as the wordless foundation for ethics. And in this sense, it becomes a social construct that serves to guide cultures into the ever unknowable future. And faith, I think faith is it's actually a form of pragmatics. Because at the end of the day, what faith is saying is that it insists that at some point, we have to get out of our heads and just get on with the experience of living. Now again, these are personal reflections, and I'm offering them here as a contribution to a conversation that I think our culture in this moment could be more attentive to. A line of reasoning that brings the spiritual language of the Gita into the more comfortable timbre of current political and scientific discourse could be useful. And personally, I'd like to map out the way that worship, comprised of devotion, knowledge, and action, three components for worship, can be understood as a social tool suited to the times we're living in now. Okay, right. So about now, some of you are thinking, be honest, some of you are thinking, when's he going to get to the paperclips? I know some of you are just here for the paperclips. It was in the title. Right, so, okay, fair enough. Let's talk about paperclips. Right, that's the wrong button. There we go. Okay, hang on. I mean, they're almost obsolete, aren't they? Like, I'm judging me by the gray hairs in some of the audience. You know what I'm talking about, paperclips. Some of you young ones, I'm not so sure about it. I still have analogies and metaphors that relate to phone books. What for? Anyway, okay, paperclips. So, what if, as seems likely, we're about to create our very own generalized intelligence machine, like a super chat GPT, capable of teaching itself whatever it thinks it needs to know. Now, compared to human processes, this machine intelligence is far faster, more inventive, and utterly tireless. It's running calculations night and day. And we intuitively think of AI as a tool. I know everybody's heard about AI, but I mean, really, it goes under the category of tool. It's a tool. But the problem is, tool is a very strong metaphor. And in the case of AI, it can be quite misleading. See, generalized AI is, like us, a generalized problem solver. It's not really like a normal tool, like, say, a hammer. So a hammer's functions are limited by its form. I mean, a hammer can't practically be used as a paintbrush, not even to paint your nails. But a generalized AI has no such limits of form. It's got no such, it can choose any form to fit the functions it thinks it has been asked to perform. So the paperclip story itself comes from the futurist and philosopher Nick Bostrom. He presented it as a thought experiment, which a cautionary tale of the first stirrings of AI about 20 years ago, and it goes like this. Let's imagine a generalized AI, or superintelligence, which thinks it has been given the goal of maximizing the production of paperclips. That's what it thinks it's been given as a goal. And naturally, the AI sets out faithfully to increase the efficiency of existing paperclip factories, and soon enough, all those factories are running at peak capacity. But why stop there? Soon, the AI thinks, oh, I'm capable of learning, and since I'm tirelessly working to advance my prime directive, it develops a bold plan to convert other factories to also maximize the production of paperclips. Not long after this, it concludes that any non-goal aligned activities are impediments to paperclip manufacture. The maximizer uses its immense influence to marshal energy, resources, and technology to achieve its goal. Everything can be converted to paperclips. Eventually, the AI notices that people are made of atoms. Those atoms could be more usefully arranged as paperclips. And what about the moon and the stars? A plane of paperclips stretching off to the far event horizon. Crazy, right? It's crazy. But we can imagine, where did it all go wrong? Perhaps the problem with this deranged AI is in the initial goal setting. Maybe that's where, if only we'd given the AI better instructions, surely things would have turned out fine, don't you think? But that's the catch. As it turns out, there is no way to provide the AI with an internally consistent instruction set that would preclude any possibility of a freakishly bad outcome. This is an idle speculation. To this day, it remains an unresolved dilemma, a fundamental problem to the whole proposition of generalized AI. And then thinking a bit deeper, we can see that the issue isn't really with the instruction set itself. The issue is that there's an absolute distance between a world of symbols and the world itself. So just consider the sentence, maximize the production of paperclips. It's a 5-word string of symbols. But to be able to enact those symbols in the actual world, well, we must delineate each shade of meaning and implication, specify the inference and the contingency, locate a specific from within the archetypal, and soon we're trying to anchor our 5 simple symbols to the entire universe in order to achieve clarity with regard to a paperclip. The task is impossible. The symbols simply don't map onto the world as it is or as it is becoming, and in truth, the map has never been the territory. But this foundational error doesn't seem to slow us down. Except for a few philosophers and AI researchers, no one is taking the paperclip maximizer seriously. For one thing, a rogue algorithm with a paperclip fetish just seems like a ridiculous thing to worry about. But here's the kicker. I reckon we're already inside a paperclip maximizer, deep inside. We're already enslaved to an overly narrow, goal-seeking mechanism, and it has been fantastically successful at advancing its goals so far. But it doesn't produce paperclips, it produces zeros. We know it as the algorithm of finance, and we call it capitalism. You might think I'm drawing a long bow, and for the purposes of this lecture, maybe it's a long bow. But on the other hand, look around, you can't find a thing, nothing you come in contact with, nothing that hasn't been deformed by the pressure of capital to make a capital return. Everything has been deformed and shaped by that process. The capital maximizer squeezes everything and everyone from every direction at every step, demanding shaved angles and shortcuts with the singular goal of finding the shortest route back to the ledger, returning margins as large as possible before heading back out to repeat the process. Everything has been and is being impacted by this zero machine. Finance has actually kind of replaced fire as the universal element of transformation. Everything can be monetized, every moment can be monetized so that finance can flow through it. And it is transformed thereby into other objects and moments that can be of entirely different contexts. That's weird. We have no idea where our money has been. The zeros in my Australian ethical super fund have circulated through which carbon offset project for which smelter supplying that defense contractor making those components for that jet pilot who flattens the girls' school. How's my retirement going? Now, I'm not talking about reasonable profit here. There's an energetic profit mechanism that pervades all thriving systems. Even at a cellular level, nothing can function for long if it expends more energy than it takes in. So sure, making a profit is fine, like the formidable vegetable sound system saying, get yourself a yield. That's all good. I'm not talking about that. What we've created in the past 400 years is something weirdly different. We've built the equivalent of an unconstrained, unaccountable paperclip maximizer and turned it loose on ourselves and our world. The reproduction of capital has become our era's single point of interest, a totalizing form of shared purpose with no one actually in charge. It's an impressive example of autopoiesis, or the emergent phenomenon arising from the countless repeated interactions of simple agents like us. We've positioned the economy as our ultimate arbiter of rational choice, and yet the explicit goal of capital is recursive. As with the paperclips, there is no endpoint. Right now, the net worth of the global economy is about AU 1.2 quadrillion dollars. That's enough for everybody to have a feed. Money is not in short supply. It's simply aggregated into the accounts of a few strange attractors where it can be more efficiently align itself to its core goal, which is faster reproduction of itself. I mean, how much more money do we need? It's a strange disease, but if you think about it, it's sort of like saying the 26 letters of the English alphabet are somehow limiting the amount of wisdom available in writing. We could write lovely stories if only we had more E's, or there's just not enough K's. I mean, really, the world is literally awash in capital, but sometimes, somehow, it seems we always need more. And no one has a clue how many more. How many do we need before we can finally achieve something like, say, a more equitable distribution of economic power? How much will that cost? And no one can say how much money we need before our grandparents don't have to grind away their last days to afford a rental, or even how much would it cost to not kill people in the name of oil. So it's important to remember that capital is a symbol that we first dreamed up as a tool of cooperation to achieve social scale goals. But somehow we've kind of given up on the social goals. For now, deep inside a mindless maximizer of own construction, Nobody has a clue how many more paperclips or zeros we might need. Instead, the only thing we know is that we need more. You might think the billionaire class are to blame, and they certainly are enablers, but in more precise terms, they are also in servitude to the same insatiable Waitiko-like call of capital as shackled to its unremitting hunger as the rest of us. Doesn't matter where you go, the capital economy is already there, reassuring you that even among strangers, regardless of class, everyone knows the rules of capital return. It's a big church, and we're all in it. The prime directive is to return a profit. There is no alternative. Do whatever you like, as long as capital is reproduced, and the faster, the better. No one is talking about paperclips. But I put it to you, this is where we are. The maximizer is in full operation, grinding the planet and everything in it to an undifferentiated, commodified pulp of symbols. And perhaps right now it may seem like there is no alternative. So we smile to each other in the noxious, sputtering glow of the last of the oil, burning our life energies one day at a time as we feed zeros into the gaping maw of finance, chanting gibberish memes loosely based on some long-forgotten promise of trickle-down emancipation from material precarity. Right, okay, modernity, progress. We take it as a given. It's just like the background hum of our enviable lifestyles, but I reckon its time is passing. Noah Yuval Harari, he's a great cheerleader for modernity and Western civilization in particular. He says that civilizations offer a value proposition. Individuals agree to give up some of their autonomy, and in exchange, all citizens will enjoy living without the threat of war, avoiding starvation, and not dying of the plague. It's like peace, food, and public health, all achieved as a cooperative act of social agency. And that's a lovely premise. So if we're going to set that as a goal, let's then measure up. How well has Western civilization delivered? And I think it's a pretty mixed bag. We've certainly given up a lot of individual sovereignty, but the progress, so our peace, seems to depend on continuous wars for material resources. We've leveled up to a scientifically enhanced industrial approach to agriculture that results in poor people actually starving, while the rest of us are malnourished in a gluttony of low-grade processed food. And as for dodging the plague, I doubt many of us are confident that Western civilization is actually up for the job. And recall that modernity isn't actually that old. It's about the age of a single mature river red gum. It was about 400 years ago when the European fixation on progress and materialism helped power the incorporation of corporation and nation states, the ascent of capitalism, and the emergence of global urban identity. All this was cooking along at the turn of the last century when Westerners cracked the lid on one of nature's biggest cookie jars, fossil fuels. And from then to now, we've experienced an unrelenting acceleration in practically every material dimension on the planet. Modernity more or less strapped up on a jetpack, a diesel-powered jetpack, mind you, gas-powered jetpack, and it hasn't looked back. Hyperbolic everything, no limits. But what we're starting to see is that no limits is possibly no way to run a civilization. See, many of us accept the proposition that humanity's goal ought to be to live sustainably. And by this I mean live with the overarching goal of continuing to live. It seems straightforward, and yet for some perverse reason we seem to be doing a spectacularly bad job of living like there is a tomorrow. Why is that? And if it's so hard, I mean, just looking back and reviewing the stories today, if large aggregations of people inevitably live beyond their local resource base, and cities always fail, at some point shouldn't we ask, are humans even supposed to be sustainable? Now, since we're here to think interesting thoughts, let me continue to challenge this idea of sustainability just for a little bit. And I wonder, is duration itself even an appropriate goal for us? It might not be our strong suit. You know, we can claim about 2 million years of Homo lineage, but that still puts us like 480 million years behind horseshoe crabs. And we don't have a hope of catching up to tardigrades or the stromatolites like in Western Australia. So I think really we need to consider other patterns if we're going to properly justify our existence. And interestingly, the world is full of examples where a species or an ecosystem temporarily expresses a function and then discards it, as naturally as flowering plants blossom in the most extravagant way, and then set seed, and then jettison all the blossoming apparatus, leaving it to rejoin the great soil cycle. Perhaps, instead of imagining Homo sapiens as an enduring expression of life's highest ambitions, we might more accurately understand ourselves as akin to those specialized cells that create seeds for the flower. Perhaps we are here to do a very particular sort of job, and then we, as a species, will have no further utility at that point in the Gaian life cycle. So this is an example of wondering, why does life need people? I don't know, that's for sure. There are white-hot mysteries glowing in the center of these questions that cannot be grasped directly. But using metaphor as if it were a blacksmith's tongs, perhaps we can get some sense of the nature of the dilemmas before us. And right now, we're confronted by what seems to be a dead-end ideology, endless material growth on a finite planet, modernity's crowning achievement, the inability to understand limits. How could this possibly make sense? To explore the matter, I made a little metaphor. How many of us are chicken shepherds? Are chickens at home? We have a little flock. Yeah, good, beautiful. That's great. I knew it would happen. We tend a little flock at home as well. They're retired hens pensioned off from the local free-range egg farm. We don't get much in the way of eggs, but we love living with the little dinosaurs. So you know it takes 21 days for a chick to hatch, right? So one day, about day 19, I'm staring at this egg and wondering what's going on in there. By this point, I'm imagining, the chick has developed a sense of self and is becoming aware of its condition, as far as it knows. What if this egg-bound chick's blossoming self-awareness divides into two camps? One half of its instincts are hell-bent on material consumption, devouring every bit of tasty yolk as fast as it can, unlimited growth, drill, baby, drill. The other half of my little chick's brain, that's this guy, starting to freak a bit. You see, this half of the brain uses its brain. After surveying the entire known universe, it's clear that this is the only yoke we have. We need to power down and conserve. Infinite growth in a finite world is literally impossible. I mean, either you understand science or you don't, right? Okay, so both sides in this irreconcilable conflict are making value assessments based on what they know of their world. And neither side has a clue about the impending phase change from planet egg to planet Earth. So if you and I are inside this egg, how do we make the right decisions? In this mad, fossil-fueled hockey stick moment, are we, unwittingly, helping life to crack through some sort of existential shell? Or should we all be developing a taste for donut economics and declutter our low-impact lifestyle so they can fit to last the next 1,000 years? The chicken and the egg story is a perfectly valid way to feel our way into a mystery that seems to be unfolding right now. And actually, I reckon it's okay that we don't know the answer, because we could and should have little idea about emergent phenomena at a scale beyond our own capabilities. But as so often the case, a satisfying conclusion opens the door to another question. So if humans are in some sort of larval development stage and we can't know what metascale transformations life may be urging us toward, why should we bother worrying about choices and consequences at all? If some metamorphic deus ex machina has already decided our destiny, wouldn't random, simplistic hedonism be just as morally defensible as any other choice? I think the answer here is a firm no. I'll return to that as well. But expecting everyone to simply be nice is too simplistic. After all, life is full of predators and parasites, deceivers, dilettantes, marshflies and mozzies, and somehow life seems to need them all. Perhaps life is set up in a way that ensures we'll never know Perhaps the true Tao really is the Tao that can't be spoken. So it's probably wise to accept a deep sense of humility when approaching these matters, and once that humility is firmly set at the core of our epistemologies, then we might step forward with courage and consider questions of immense scale. These are Chladni plates. The fellow you see here is using a violin bow to resonate the plates. He's introducing vibration or frequency to the particles. And look at what happens. The particles shift and align into standing waves of order and pattern, flowing against the tide of entropy. It's interesting how in the biblical tradition, we're told that in the beginning was a word, a sound that called forth the world. In the Vedic scripts, Om is the primordial cause that precedes all creation, again, a sound. Indigenous stories map out song lines that literally sing the world into being. And it was Darwin who suggested that human language, what we're doing here today, probably descended from singing. According to this theory, our ancestors used song to call ever more elaborate social structures into reality, long before the formalities of spoken language could actually evolve or have a purpose for evolving. So keep that sort of hum in mind and step outwards a few orders of magnitude and consider the sun emitting a long, slow hum, bathing this planet with highly organized wavelengths of energy over geological timeframes. I think all of this points to something about existence that seems primed to form orderly structures in the presence of energetic flows. According to Jeremy Lint, this is expressed in the Taoist notion of Li. Li is like an elegant alignment, like how a wood carver can appreciate the grain of the wood as she finds it. And when we respect this Li, we find balance and harmony. And that's why, even if our knowledge is profoundly limited, like the chicken in the egg, I think we can still intuit a morally aligned course of action in the world. Our world is full of energy flows, and where energy flows, there are reverberatory patterns and oscillations. And they infer the presence of polarities, opposites. You have to have that in order for reverberations to exist, opposites. This happens, and these patterns happen at all scales, and especially in the context of the immaterial or liminal processes that define culture patterns, social conventions, and other forms of groupness that our species is so deeply expressive of. And in the middle of all of this, one polarity attracts my attention more than the others, and that's the resonance chamber that exists between substance and symbol, between maps and territory. What could all that mean? Well, here's a very short story that Lewis Carroll hinted at, and which was later referenced by both Louis Borges and Italo Calvino. So imagine a traveler is standing, he's looking out at this marvelous valley. The valley radiates vitality, neat fields, a handsome, prosperous village, and plenty of old trees. A local comes by, and the traveler asks, "How did this fine valley come to be?" And the local replies, "Well, not easily. Let me tell you, we nearly lost it back in the old times." So, what changed? Well, we saved ourselves through planning and mapping. And really? Wow, there must be some plans and maps. I'd like to see them. Can I learn more? So, nope. All that's a thing of the past. And so, what? Why? So, well, the more we planned, the bigger the map. And at first, it was really good. Eventually, though, we needed a map that was the same size as the actual valley, just to show all the details. It was an incredible map, mesmerizing, in fact. Problem was, it blocked out the sun. The farmers complained, and that was the end of it. What kind of a map do you use now? Oh, now we just use the valley itself. I can assure you it works just as well. Maybe better. Putting things on a map can be hugely empowering. Mapping is one of the most useful grammars our species has come up with. Maps are woven into every facet of our social intelligence, from the maps for a good hunt to the maps of the sacred. But Carroll's story of the big map is ultimately equivocal. As a planning tool, maps are essential, but maps are not the territory, and they can end up obscuring as much as they reveal. Maps and territory Neither modality is complete, and both are valid. So I suggest that what we need here is a generative question, something we can ask over and over again from multiple perspectives and receive guidance suited to our moment, in the way that Arjuna's faith was sufficient to carry him forward in his moments of crisis. So here's a suggestion. Consider the question, why does life need people? Why does life need people? The questions you come up with, the answers you come up with, the clarifications, the debates, the fresh new metaphors, all these contemplations where this question is at the core, I reckon these are all in the correct order of magnitude for us to meditate upon. Why does life need people? In a society where this question is the opening premise of what moonshots we take, what sacrifices we bear, and what lines we won't cross, I believe we will experience a more remarkable journey, both individually and collectively. In a culture where this question is central to positionality, I'm certain we will find a more sure way to flow with the lee of our destiny. I'd like to wrap up, strangely enough, with a few reflections on weeds and ferals. Simple question. With all due respect to the weedos, I love the banner, I love the energy. But they're just fellow creatures, these foreign plants and animals. They're just doing what they do. So why don't we appreciate them for their own value? Why don't we love them as fellow travelers? Now there's an economic dimension. How could you miss that? Farmers and land managers resent the loss of coin. But there's also the conservation factor. These foreign newcomers are disrupting the unique character of this place, driving the incumbent residents out of business and speaking foreign languages. I'm talking about weeds and ferals, of course. Now seriously though, there's a lot of self-loathing when I look at my paddock full of giant rat's tail grass or the local wetland choked with hymenoctony. Don't get me wrong. I spend a lot of time pulling up weeds. Don't even get started with the pigs and camels and cane toads. But on reflection, I think we are obligated to make room for everyone. Colonization is a way of being in the world. It's a modality. It's expressed by cancer cells and corals, honeybees, slime molds, plague viruses, Zionists. It's not our job to police the polarities. If we were designers of healthy ecosystems and had a blank slate to work with, we'd actually be obligated to include colonizing weeds. See, the world will never be 100% old-growth forests or peak functioning savannas. You've got volcanism, climate change, tectonic drift. They ensure that in every environment, terrestrial, marine, atmospheric, they're always in a state of flux. Wipeouts will occur. Old stabilities will collapse. Now weeds, they just behave like greedy narcissists. They aren't burdened by long-term plans, they aren't worried about consequences, weeds just go for it. And their talent for insular self-interest actually makes them ideal first responders for re-establishing biological function where nothing else can survive. And perhaps more challenging, even in fragile, broken, or senescent landscapes, weeds and foreign colonizers will proliferate. They may even come to dominate. But in the course of time, conditions will change again. The stability that the weeds themselves help to create begins to favor creatures with longer-term strategies, more complex patterns of cooperation. And in time, the dominance of the weeds will give way, making room for successor entities and their successors, and onwards until we're finally sitting in the presence of that 400-year-old river red gum, marveling at the wisdom expressed not just by this one ancient being, but by the whole interconnected fabric of mycelium, marsupials, magpies, and meandering creek line. And in that moment of wonder, we can also, and we must also let it go. All of this will die, decay, and fade away. Weeds will reappear. See, it's not our job to hold things in stasis. in a kind of permanence that suits our cravings for material security. We live in a state of reverberation. The past opens and constrains the possibilities for now. I can't choose to not be descended from my colonial past. I can, however, choose to live in reverence of something more worthy than a paperclip maximizer. And perhaps I can place my actions in the service of the question, why does life need people? So now let's go forward in grace with our plantings and our many purposes, and let's leave our human nature to unfold according to its destiny. You and I will remain infinite as we are. You've been wonderful. Thank you.